Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Russell Fraser stood at his office window on the 42nd floor, watching the Seattle skyline fade into dusk. At 38, he commanded respect in boardrooms and fear in negotiations. His construction empire, Fraser Dynamics, had built half the city's modern infrastructure. But success came with a price, one he thought his family understood. The mahogany desk behind him held a framed photo of his wife Krista and their 8-year-old daughter Hannah. 15 years of marriage, built on what he believed was unwavering loyalty. Krista, a former art teacher turned socialite, had given up her career to support his ambitions. She managed their social calendar, hosted dinner parties for his business associates, and raised Hannah with the discipline Russell valued. His phone buzzed. A text from Krista, dinner with Hannah at 7. Please don't be late again. Russell's jaw tightened. 3 late dinners this week, but each one had secured million-dollar contracts. The Riverside Development project alone would cement their financial future for generations. He typed back, on my way. The drive to their Bellevue estate gave Russell time to decompress. The gated community of Fairhaven Hills represented everything he'd worked for: exclusivity, security, success. Their Tudor-style mansion sat on 2 acres, complete with a pool, guest house, and Krista's art studio that doubled as her sanctuary. Inside, the aroma of Krista's signature lasagna filled the air. Hannah bounded down the marble staircase, her blonde curls bouncing as she launched herself into his arms. "Daddy, Mom said you might miss dinner again, but I knew you'd come." Russell held his daughter tight, feeling the day's tension melt away. "I promised, didn't I?" Frasers keep their promises. Krista emerged from the kitchen, her auburn hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. At 35, she maintained the grace that had first caught his attention at university fundraiser. But something in her emerald eyes seemed distant lately. "Welcome home, honey," she said, offering her cheek for a kiss. Her smile felt rehearsed. During dinner, Hannah chattered about her upcoming school play while Krista picked at her food. Russell noticed the new bracelet on her wrist, white gold with sapphires, not something he bought her. "Nice bracelet," he commented casually. Krista's fort paused midair. "Oh, this old thing? Found it in my jewelry box. Must have forgotten about it." Russell's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. In 15 years of marriage, he'd learned to catalog every piece of jewelry he'd given her. This wasn't one of them. After Hannah went to bed, Russell retreated to his study while Krista claimed exhaustion. He pulled up the security systems app on his phone, reviewing the day's footage from their property cameras. Everything appeared normal. Krista's yoga session by the pool, Hannah playing in the garden, the usual delivery trucks. But something nagged at him. Russell had built his empire on reading people, spotting deception before it cost him millions. The same instincts that served him in business were now whispering warnings about his own home. He opened his laptop and began reviewing their joint credit card statements. Most charges were routine: groceries, Hannah's school fees, Krista's spa visits. But then he found it, a charge at Morton's Steakhouse on Tuesday afternoon. The same Tuesday Krista claimed to have lunch with her book club. Russell's expression hardened. Morton's wasn't a book club venue. It was where executives took clients, where affairs began over expensive wine and intimate conversations. The foundation of his perfect life was showing cracks, and Russell Fraser had never been one to ignore structural defects. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. 3 days of careful observation confirmed Russell's suspicions. Krista's patterns had changed subtly. Longer trips to the grocery store, mysterious phone calls that ended when he entered the room, and a new attention to her appearance that wasn't meant for him. Russell's military background had taught him patience and tactical thinking. In the Marines, rushing into situations got people killed. The same principle applied here: gather intelligence before engaging the enemy. He installed a discreet tracking app on Krista's phone while she showered, using the emergency family locator excuse he'd already prepared if questioned. The app would send him location updates every 30 minutes. Thursday afternoon brought the first real evidence. Krista's phone showed her at the Four Seasons downtown, not at her claimed appointment with their daughter's guidance counselor. Russell left his office early, something that raised eyebrows among his staff who knew his dedication to work. The Four Seasons bar was dimly lit, designed for privacy and intimate conversations. Russell positioned himself at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance, ordering scotch and pretending to review contracts on his tablet. At 3:47 p.m., Krista walked in wearing a black dress he'd never seen before. She scanned the room before walking confidently toward a booth in the back corner. Russell's blood turned to ice when he saw her companion stand to greet her. Marco Leonard. The recognition hit like a physical blow. Marco had been Russell's business partner 5 years ago, before Russell discovered Marco was skimming money from their joint ventures. Russell had quietly bought out Marco's shares and blacklisted him from major construction projects in the Northwest. Marco's subsequent business failures had been both predictable and satisfying. Now the bastard was sitting in a booth with Russell's wife, his hand covering hers across the table. Russell watched them for 47 minutes, memorizing every gesture, every laugh, every intimate touch. Marco had gained weight since their partnership ended, his once sharp suits now slightly rumpled. But his predatory charm remained intact. The same charisma that had initially impressed Russell now focused entirely on his wife. When they stood to leave, Marco's hand rested possessively on Krista's lower back. They walked out together, but not before Russell caught sight of something that made his vision blur with rage. Krista wore no wedding ring. The drive home passed in a haze of carefully controlled fury. Russell had survived firefights in Afghanistan, hostile takeovers, and construction site accidents that should have killed him. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of his wife removing her wedding ring for another man. Especially not that man. By the time Russell reached home, he'd made a decision. This wasn't just infidelity, this was war. And Russell Frazier had never lost a war. Krista was in the kitchen when he arrived, humming while she prepared dinner. The domestic scene would have been comforting 12 hours ago. Now it felt like theater. "How was your day?" she asked without turning around. "Productive," Russell replied, watching her shoulders tense slightly. "How was Hannah's conference?" "Conference?" Krista's stirring faltered. "With the guidance counselor. You said you were meeting about her academic progress." Krista recovered quickly, but Russell caught the micro-expression of panic. "Oh, that. It went well. Mrs. Peterson says Hannah's doing wonderfully in math." Another lie. Hannah's guidance counselor was Mr. Rodriguez, and Russell knew it because he'd met the man at 3 separate parent-teacher conferences. "That's good to hear," Russell said evenly. "I was thinking we should plan a family vacation. Maybe that cabin in the San Juans you've always loved." For the first time in days, Krista's smile seemed genuine. "That sounds wonderful. When were you thinking?" "Next month. I'll have my assistant book it tomorrow." Russell didn't mention that the cabin's isolation would provide the perfect setting for what he was already planning. Some conversations required privacy, and Russell intended to have a very long conversation with his wife and her lover. That night, as Krista slept beside him, Russell stared at the ceiling and began plotting. Marco had made 2 fatal mistakes. He betrayed Russell professionally, and now he'd done it personally. Some men might be content with divorce and custody battles. Russell wasn't some man. He reached for his phone and sent a text to his sister Tamara. "Need to talk. Can you watch Hannah this weekend?" The response came immediately. "Always." "Everything okay?" Russell looked at his sleeping wife, her face peaceful in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. Soon, that peace would be shattered forever. "Just need to handle some business," he replied. Chapter 3. The Art of War. Russell's sister Tamara Charles lived in a converted warehouse in Pioneer Square, her photographer's studio occupying the top floor of the industrial building. At 34, she shared Russell's sharp features and predatory instincts, but channeled them into art rather than business warfare. Saturday morning found Russell at her door, Hannah in tow with her overnight bag. "Uncle Russell." Hannah hugged Tamara's legs as she opened the door. "Are you taking pictures today?" "We're going to create a masterpiece," Tamara said, scooping Hannah up. But her eyes remained fixed on Russell's face, reading the storm brewing behind his controlled expression. While Hannah explored the studio's equipment, Russell pulled Tamara aside. "I need 3 days," he said quietly. "No questions, no contact with Krista unless it's an emergency involving Hannah." Tamara studied her brother's face. They'd survived their father's alcoholic rages and their mother's abandonment together, developing an unspoken communication that required few words. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough that when this is over, you'll understand why I couldn't tell you details." Tamara nodded. In their family, loyalty wasn't just expected. It was the foundation of survival. "Hannah's safe here. Do what you need to do." Russell knelt beside his daughter, who was examining a camera lens with scientific curiosity. "Princess, I need you to stay with Aunt Tamara for a few days. Daddy has some work to finish." Hannah's face fell slightly. "Will you call me every night?" "Every single night," Russell promised, kissing her forehead. "And when I'm done, we'll go on that vacation to the cabin." The drive back to Bellevue gave Russell time to finalize his strategy. He'd spent the previous evening researching Marco's current situation, using private investigator resources he normally reserved for vetting business partners. Marco Leonard was desperate. His construction consulting firm was hemorrhaging money. His divorce from his second wife had cost him half his remaining assets, and he was 3 months behind on his Seattle condo payments. The man was drowning financially, which explained his sudden reappearance in Russell's orbit. But desperation made men reckless, and Russell intended to exploit that weakness. At home, Krista was reading in the living room, a glass of wine beside her chair. "Where's Hannah?" she asked as Russell entered. "Spending the weekend with Tamara. I thought we could use some alone time." Krista's face brightened, and Russell felt a stab of something that might have been grief for what they'd lost. But the emotion passed quickly, replaced by cold calculation. "That sounds perfect," Krista said, closing her book. "What did you have in mind?" "Actually, I need to handle some business first. There's a problem with the Riverside project that can't wait until Monday." The lie came easily. Russell had learned deception from masters. Krista and Marco had taught him well. On Saturday, Krista's disappointment seemed genuine. "You know how it is. These government contracts don't care about weekends." Russell kissed the top of her head, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo. Soon, everything familiar would be destroyed, but first, he needed to set the trap. In his study, Russell opened a secure laptop he used for sensitive business dealings. His first call was to Timothy A. Bear, a private investigator who specialized in corporate espionage and discreet surveillance. "Tim, it's Russell Frazier. I need a comprehensive workup on Marco Leonard. Financial records, phone logs, current associates, debts, everything." "How comprehensive?" Timothy's gravelly voice carried the weight of 30 years in law enforcement before going private. "Assume I'm buying his company and need to know every skeleton in every closet. That thorough." "Got it. When do you need this?" "Monday morning." Timothy whistled low. "Weekend rates apply. Money's not an object. But Tim, this stays between us. If word leaks back to Leonard or anyone else, our business relationship ends permanently." "Understood. I'll have your report by dawn Monday." Russell's second call was to Abel Phelps, a real estate developer who owed Russell several favors from past dealings. "Abel, I need you to make Marco Leonard an offer he can't refuse." "Leonard? That washed-up contractor? What kind of offer?" "His consulting firm. I want you to approach him about a merger, maybe even a buyout. Make it sound desperate on your end, like you need his expertise for a major project. And the real purpose. I need him distracted and hopeful while I handle other matters. Can you string him along for a week or two? Consider it done." "But Russell, you're starting to worry me. This isn't like your usual business practices." Russell's voice turned glacial. "Some betrayals require creative responses." The weekend passed with Russell playing the perfect husband, cooking breakfast for Krista, suggesting a movie night, even accompanying her to the farmer's market where she chatted with neighbors who had no idea their marriage was already over. But Russell was studying her, memorizing her patterns and tells. He noticed how she checked her phone obsessively, how she jumped slightly when it buzzed, how she angled the screen away from him when reading messages. Sunday evening, as they prepared for bed, Krista's phone chimed with a text. Russell caught a glimpse of the sender. Work? He asked casually. Just my book club planning next week's meeting, Krista replied, sliding the phone into her nightstand drawer. Russell nodded and smiled, but behind his eyes, something cold and final had crystallized. He'd given her multiple opportunities to confess, to show remorse, to demonstrate that their marriage meant something worth fighting for. Instead, she'd chosen to compound her betrayal with constant lies. As Krista drifted off to sleep, Russell lay awake calculating. By next weekend, both she and Marco would understand what happened when someone betrayed Russell Frazier. The game was no longer about saving his marriage. It was about absolute victory. And Russell Frazier never accepted anything less than total victory. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. Monday morning brought Timothy's report, delivered in person to Russell's private office. The former detective's weathered face bore the expression of a man who'd seen too much human ugliness to be surprised anymore. Your instincts were right, Timothy said, sliding a thick folder across Russell's desk. Marco Leonard is in deep trouble, and your wife is his lifeline. Russell opened the folder, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the details. Bank statements showed Marco's business was 3 weeks from bankruptcy. Phone records revealed daily contact with Krista for the past 2 months. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails Timothy had obtained through less-than-legal means. In them, Marco outlined a plan that made Russell's blood turn to ice. The cabin will be perfect. Isolated, no neighbors for miles. Russell mentioned he wants to take a family vacation there next month. We can use that. Krista's response was equally chilling. Are you sure about this? Hannah will be there. We'll make sure she's safe. But Russell has to disappear, Krista. It's the only way we can be together and solve my financial problems. His life insurance alone is worth $8 million. Russell read the exchange 3 times before the full implications sank in. This wasn't just an affair, it was a murder plot. They intended to kill him at the family cabin he'd suggested, making it look like an accident, and collect the insurance money to fund their new life together. There's more, Timothy said grimly. Leonard has been researching your routines, your security systems, even Hannah's school schedule. This isn't a crime of passion, it's premeditated. Russell closed the folder, his expression carved from stone. How long have you known? Got the first hints Friday night, confirmed it this morning. I've been doing this for 30 years, Russell, and I've never seen anything this cold-blooded. What's the timeline? Based on their communications, they're planning to act during your cabin trip. Leonard's financial situation gives him maybe 2 weeks before creditors start seizing assets. Russell stood and walked to his window, staring out at the city he'd helped build. Below, construction cranes moved like mechanical predators, reshaping the skyline according to his vision. Now he needed to reshape his personal situation with the same ruthless efficiency. I want you to maintain surveillance on both of them, Russell said without turning around. But from now on, we're not just gathering evidence. We're setting up a counter-operation. What kind of counter-operation? Russell turned back to Timothy, and the private investigator involuntarily stepped back at what he saw in Russell's eyes. The kind that ensures they never get the chance to carry out their plan. That evening, Russell arrived home to find Krista in her art studio, supposedly working on a new painting. Through the window, he could see her on the phone, gesturing animatedly. As he approached, she quickly ended the call and picked up a paintbrush. "How was your day?" she asked, not meeting his eyes. "Interesting. I had a conversation with the insurance company about updating our policies." Krista's brush hand trembled slightly. "Oh, what kind of updates?" "Increasing the coverage, adding some provisions for accidental death. You know how dangerous construction work can be. That's very responsible of you." Russell moved behind her, ostensibly to examine her painting, but really to watch her reflection in the window. Her face had gone pale, and a thin sheen of sweat appeared on her forehead. "I also finalized the cabin reservation," he continued. 3 weeks from now. I'm really looking forward to some family time away from all the stress." Krista's breathing became shallow. 3 weeks? That's soon. I thought we could invite some friends. Maybe have a little gathering. You could ask that book club of yours. Actually, I was hoping it would just be family time. You, me, and Hannah. Russell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Perfect. Just the three of us. Very intimate. That night, Russell lay awake listening to Krista's restless tossing beside him. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages she didn't dare check while he was conscious. Around 2 a.m., she slipped out of bed and disappeared into the bathroom. Russell followed, silently, positioning himself outside the door to hear her whispered conversation. He knows something, Marco. The way he talked about the insurance, the cabin, it felt like a test. Marco's voice was barely audible through the phone speaker, but Russell caught enough words to understand the conversation. They were accelerating their timeline. We can't wait 3 weeks, Marco whispered urgently. If he's suspicious, we need to act sooner. How much sooner? This weekend. You said he's taking Hannah to his sister's again, right? That gives us time to set everything up. Russell's hands clenched into fists. They were planning to strike while his daughter was safely away. A small mercy that saved them from an even more brutal fate than what he was already planning. What about the cabin? Krista asked. Forget the cabin. We'll do it at your house. Make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. I know a guy who can help us stage the scene. Russell had heard enough. As Krista ended the call and prepared to return to bed, he silently made his way back to their bedroom, lying down and controlling his breathing to appear asleep. When Krista slipped back under the covers, Russell remained motionless even as her proximity made his skin crawl. She was lying next to him, planning his murder, preparing to make their daughter an orphan, all for money and a future with a man who'd already proven himself untrustworthy. The woman he'd loved for 15 years had become a stranger. Worse, she'd become an enemy. But Russell had fought enemies before, and he'd always emerged victorious. This time would be no different, except the stakes were higher and the victory would be more complete. As dawn approached, Russell made his decision. If they wanted to play games of life and death, he'd show them how a true predator operated. The hunter was about to become the hunted, but Marco and Krista had no idea they were already caught in a trap of Russell's design. Chapter 5. The Perfect Storm. Wednesday morning, Russell set his plan in motion with military precision. His first stop was a meeting with Wallace Delaney, a former Special Forces operative who now ran a private security firm. Russell had used Wallace's services before for protecting construction sites in dangerous neighborhoods, but today's request was far more personal. I need a complete security overhaul in my house, Russell explained in Wallace's sparse downtown office. New system, motion sensors, cameras with audio recording capabilities in every room. Wallace's scarred face remained impassive. Standard installation or hardened security? Hardened. I want to know about every breath someone takes in that house. And Wallace, I need it installed today while my wife is out. That's short notice for complete system. Russell slid a check across the desk. Wallace glanced at the amount and nodded. We'll have your house wired by dinner time. Russell's second stop was his lawyer's office. Gordon Ford had handled Russell's business affairs for over a decade, specializing in contracts that protected Russell's interests even in the worst-case scenarios. I need my will updated, Russell said, settling into the leather chair across from Gordon's massive oak desk. Standard updates or complete revision? Complete revision. If something happens to me, I want very specific provisions for how my assets are distributed. Gordon raised an eyebrow, but pulled out a legal pad. What kind of provisions? If I die under suspicious circumstances, all assets go into a trust for Hannah until she's 25. Krista gets nothing, not the house, not the cars, not a single dollar. Russell, that's unusual. Most spouses expect. Most spouses don't plan their husband's murder. Gordon's pen stopped moving. Excuse me. Russell pulled out a folder containing copies of the emails Timothy had uncovered. Read these. 5 minutes later, Gordon set the papers down with shaking hands. Jesus Christ, Russell. You need to call the police. The police would need more evidence than illegally obtained emails. By the time they could build a case, I'd be dead and Krista would be playing the grieving widow. So what's your plan? Russell's smile was predatory. I'm going to give them exactly what they want. The perfect opportunity to kill me. But they're going to discover that killing Russell Frazier isn't as easy as they think. That afternoon, Russell played his part perfectly. He called Tamara to arrange another weekend for Hannah, then made sure Krista overheard him scheduling a late business meeting for Friday night. The Riverside project is hitting some regulatory snags. He explained to Krista over dinner. I'll need to meet with the mayor's office Friday evening. Might run late. Krista's eyes lit up with barely concealed excitement. How late? Could be past midnight. You know how these political meetings drag on. That's fine. I'll probably just watch a movie and go to bed early. Russell nodded, knowing that Krista's evening would involve much more than Netflix and wine. Thursday passed in a haze of preparations. Timothy's surveillance confirmed that Marco had recruited 2 additional men, Brett Coleman and Wes Maloney, small-time criminals with records for breaking and entering. The plan was simple. They'd enter the house while Russell was supposedly at his meeting, wait for him to return, then stage a fatal home invasion. But Russell had no intention of being a victim. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind of weather that would provide perfect cover for criminal activity. Russell kissed Hannah goodbye at Tamara's studio, holding his daughter a moment longer than usual. I love you, princess, he whispered in her hair. I love you too, Daddy. See you Sunday. See you Sunday, Russell promised, hoping it was true. The drive home took Russell through the winding roads of Bellevue, past the houses of neighbors who had no idea that one of their own was about to become a battleground. Russell's phone buzzed with a text from Timothy. All 3 subjects are in position. Marco's car is parked 2 blocks away. Coleman and Maloney entered through the back at 8:47 p.m. Russell texted back. Understood. Initiate Phase 2. Phase 2 involved a carefully choreographed deception. Russell drove to the mayor's office, made sure his car was seen in the parking garage by security cameras, then slipped out through a service entrance where Timothy waited with an unmarked sedan. Everything ready? Russell asked as they drove back toward his neighborhood. Wallace's team is in position. The new security system is recording everything, and we've got backup power in case they try to cut the main lines. And if things go wrong, Timothy's weathered face was grim. They won't. But if they do, we're prepared for that too. As they approached Russell Street, he felt the familiar calm that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Violence was coming, but this time he controlled when, where, and how it would unfold. In his house, 3 men waited in the darkness, believing they were predators preparing to feast on unsuspecting prey. Soon, they would learn the difference between hunting and being hunted. Russell checked his watch, 11:43 p.m. In 17 minutes, he would walk through his front door and discover what monsters his wife had become. But unlike the victim they expected, Russell Frazier was walking into his house as an apex predator returning to his territory. The storm was about to break, and when the lightning stopped flashing, only one side would be left standing. Chapter 6: The Eye of the Storm. Russell entered his house at exactly midnight, keys jingling loud enough to announce his arrival. The foyer was dark, but motion sensor lights activated as he stepped inside, illuminating the familiar space that had become a kill zone. He moved through his routine with deliberate normalcy, hanging his coat in the closet, setting his briefcase by the stairs, calling out softly for Krista. Every action was calculated to draw his hunters into position. From his earpiece, Timothy's voice provided real-time intelligence. Coleman is behind the kitchen island. Maloney's on the staircase landing. Marco's in your study with your wife. Russell nodded imperceptibly and walked toward the kitchen, playing the role of an exhausted businessman seeking a late-night snack. As he opened the refrigerator, the light cast long shadows across the room. Brett Coleman struck like an amateur, rising from behind the island with a crowbar raised above his head. But Russell had been expecting the attack for 47 minutes. He pivoted as the crowbar whistled through empty air, grabbed Coleman's wrist, and twisted until bones snapped with an audible crack. Coleman's scream echoed through the house as the crowbar clattered to the floor. Russell drove his knee into the man's solar plexus, doubling him over, then delivered a precise strike to the back of his neck. Coleman dropped unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. Phase 3, Russell whispered into his microphone. The house's electrical system shut down, plunging everything into darkness. But Russell had spent hours memorizing the layout with night vision equipment. His attackers were now blind in unfamiliar territory while he moved with predatory precision. Wes Maloney stumbled down the stairs, disoriented by the sudden blackout. Russell intercepted him at the bottom, a ghost materializing from shadow. Maloney swung wildly with a knife, but Russell caught his arm and used the man's momentum to drive him face first into the wall. The knife skittered across the hardwood floor as Maloney collapsed. 2 down. 1 to go. Russell moved through the house like death itself, silent and inexorable. In his study, Marco and Krista whispered urgently by the light of Marco's cell phone. "Something's wrong," Marco hissed. "Coleman should have signaled by now." "Maybe Russell's not home yet," Krista replied, but her voice carried the tremor of growing fear. "His car's in the driveway. He's here somewhere." Russell appeared in the doorway like a specter, backlit by the faint emergency lighting from the hallway. Both conspirators froze as they recognized the silhouette of their intended victim. "Looking for me?" Russell's voice carried the calm of absolute control. Marco fumbled for the gun tucked in his waistband, but Russell was already moving. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed Marco's throat with one hand, and slammed him against the bookshelf. Leather-bound volumes cascaded to the floor as Marco's feet left the ground. 15 years, Russell said, his voice barely above a whisper. 15 years I trusted you with my life, my business, my family. And this is how you repay me. Marco clawed at Russell's iron grip, his face turning purple. Krista backed toward the window, her eyes wide with terror. "Russell, please," she gasped. "We can explain." "Explain." Russell's laugh was arctic. "Explain how you planned to murder me in front of our daughter? Explain how you were going to make Hannah an orphan for insurance money." Russell released Marco, who collapsed gasping to the floor. But before Marco could recover, Russell's boot connected with his ribs, producing a wet crack that echoed through the room. "You want to know what's really going to happen?" Russell asked, grabbing Marco by the hair and forcing him to look up. "You're going to disappear. Not quickly, not cleanly. You're going to understand what it feels like to have everything you care about stripped away piece by piece." Krista found her voice, though it came out as a broken whisper. "Russell, I'm sorry. We never meant." "Meant what? To kill me? To destroy our family? To traumatize our daughter?" Russell's attention turned to his wife with an intensity that made her cower. "You wore my ring, slept in my bed, raised my child, all while planning my murder. What exactly didn't you mean to do?" Through his earpiece, Timothy's voice crackled. "Russell, we've got company. Police cars approaching, ETA 3 minutes. Russell smiled coldly. Perfect timing. He pulled out his phone and activated the house's security system. Instantly, high-definition footage began playing on the study's wall-mounted television. Coleman attacking with the crowbar, Maloney with a knife, Marco reaching for his gun. Every assault was captured in perfect detail. "Self-defense," Russell explained conversationally. 3 armed men broke into my home with intent to commit murder. I defended myself and protected my wife, who was being held hostage by her abductor. Marco's eyes widened as he understood the trap. You knew all along. I've known for weeks. The emails, the phone calls, the insurance inquiries. I have everything, Marco. Every detail of your pathetic plan to kill me and steal my life." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Russell grabbed Krista's arm and pulled her against him, his grip gentle but unbreakable. "When the police arrive, you're going to tell them exactly what happened," he whispered in her ear. "Marco forced you to help him. He threatened to kill Hannah if you didn't cooperate. You tried to warn me, but there wasn't time. Russell, I can't. You can and you will. Because if you don't, I'll make sure Hannah knows exactly what kind of mother she has. I'll show her the emails, play the recordings, let her understand that you valued money more than her father's life." Krista's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please don't do this." "I'm not doing anything," Russell replied. "You did this. I'm just cleaning up the mess." The police cars pulled into the driveway, their flashing lights painting the house in alternating red and blue. Russell released Krista and walked to the window, watching as officers surrounded the property. Behind him, Marco struggled to his feet, blood streaming from his mouth. "This isn't over, Russell. You can't. Russell spun around, his fist connecting with Marco's jaw with surgical precision. Marco's head snapped back, and he collapsed unconscious, his body going completely limp. Actually, Russell said, straightening his shirt, it's exactly over. The storm had passed, but the real destruction was just beginning. And Russell Fraser was going to make sure that everyone who had betrayed him understood the true cost of their treachery. Chapter 7. Into the Fire. Drive, my sister said, throwing my keys into my hand. Don't ask, just go. 6 weeks had passed since that night at the house. The police investigation had concluded exactly as Russell planned. Home invasion, attempted murder, heroic self-defense. Marco faced attempted murder charges, while Coleman and Maloney were singing to prosecutors about who hired them. Krista played her part perfectly, the traumatized wife grateful for her husband's protection. But Russell wasn't finished. Not even close. Marco had made bail through a bondsman, using his mother's house as collateral. The legal system would take months to deliver justice, and Russell's definition of justice went far beyond prison sentences. Some betrayals required more personal retribution. The phone call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Tamara's voice was tight with controlled panic. Russell, you need to get Hannah and get out. Now. What's wrong? Marco escaped custody during a hospital visit. He shot a guard and disappeared. Word is he's coming for you tonight. Russell was already moving, pulling on clothes while his mind calculated options. Marco had nothing left to lose. His business was gone, his legal defense was crumbling, and Russell's counterattack had systematically destroyed what remained of his life. A desperate man with nothing to lose was the most dangerous predator of all. I carry my daughter, still half asleep, into the truck. Hannah stirred as Russell lifted her from bed, her eyes confused in the darkness. Daddy? What's happening? We're going on an adventure, princess. Like camping, but better. Where's Mommy? Russell's jaw tightened. Krista was at her sister's house in Vancouver, supposedly seeking therapy for her trauma. In reality, she was putting distance between herself and the consequences of her actions. Russell had allowed it, because he needed her alive for what came next. Mommy's safe. She'll meet us later. Hannah nodded sleepily against his shoulder as he carried her to his truck. The mountain cabin he'd mentioned weeks ago had become their genuine destination, not for family bonding, but because its isolation made it defensible. Tamara was waiting by her car, engine running, her photographer's bags replaced with military-grade equipment she'd learned to use during her own military service. He's got help, she said as Russell secured Hannah in the back seat. At least 3 men, maybe more. They hit your house 20 minutes ago. As we hit the road, she said, don't look back. But I did. The convoy of 2 vehicles raced through empty Seattle streets toward the mountains. Russell's rearview mirror showed the city lights fading behind them. But 20 minutes into the drive, an orange glow appeared on the horizon, and saw fires spilling from the windows. The flames were visible from 5 miles away, a pillar of destruction rising from the direction of Russell's neighborhood. Hannah slept peacefully in the back seat, unaware that her childhood home was burning to the ground. Russell pulled over at a scenic overlook, stepping out to watch his $4.2 million house become an inferno. Tamara joined him, both siblings silent as they witnessed the destruction. Insurance? She asked. Marco's too smart for arson charges. He'd have made it look electrical. Russell's voice was eerily calm, but he made a tactical error, which is, he's eliminated my connection to Seattle. Now I have no reason to hold back. Russell's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I took everything from you. Now I'm coming for what's left. Russell smiled as he typed his response. Come and get it. I froze in shock as I saw. But Russell's shock wasn't from the fire. It was from the tactical brilliance of Marco's move. By destroying the house, Marco had eliminated Russell's evidence vault. The security recordings, backup files, and physical documentation of their conspiracy. More importantly, he'd drawn Russell into the open, away from the urban environment where Russell held every advantage. In the mountains, with limited backup and communication, Russell would be vulnerable for the first time since this war began. He's forcing us into his territory, Russell realized aloud. What do you mean? The cabin. He knows where we're going because he helped plan the original murder there. He's not chasing us. He's hurting us. Tamara's face went pale. It's a trap, the biggest one he's ever set. But Marco's forgotten something important. What's that? Russell looked at his sleeping daughter, then at the distant fire consuming everything he'd built in Seattle. When he turned back to Tamara, his eyes held the cold fury of a man who'd been pushed beyond all limits. I've never lost a war, and I'm not starting now. They climbed back into their vehicles and continued toward the mountains, but now they weren't fleeing to safety. They were driving toward the final confrontation, where one side would emerge victorious and the other would never threaten anyone again. Behind them, the fire painted the sky in shades of orange and red, a funeral pyre for Russell's old life. Ahead, in the darkness of the Cascade Mountains, his new life waited to be forged in blood and vengeance. Marco wanted total war. Russell Fraser was about to show him what total war really meant. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by ancient Douglas firs, its log walls dark against the pre-dawn sky. Russell had purchased the property through shell companies years ago, but Marco's intelligence network had obviously penetrated his security measures. The building that should have been a sanctuary was now a kill box. Russell parked a quarter-mile away, hidden among the trees. Through binoculars, he counted at least 6 men positioned around the cabin. Marco had recruited serious muscle for this final confrontation. They're expecting us to walk into an ambush, Tamara whispered, adjusting her own scope. Then we'll give them exactly what they expect. Russell's plan was surgical in its simplicity. Hannah would remain in the truck with Tamara, while Russell approached the cabin alone, appearing to surrender. But concealed throughout the property were weapons caches he'd established during previous visits. Insurance policies for exactly this scenario. I don't like this, Tamara said. Too many variables. Marco's desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. Russell checked his concealed pistol and knife. When this is over, I want you to drive Hannah to Portland. Stay at the Marriott downtown until you hear from me. And if I don't hear from you, Russell handed her a sealed envelope. Instructions for Hannah's trust fund and custody arrangements. Gordon Ford has copies of everything. Tamara grabbed his arm. Russell, there has to be another way. There was. Marco chose this path when he decided to involve my daughter. Russell's voice carried the finality of an executioner. Some lines can't be uncrossed. Russell approached the cabin through the forest, making enough noise to announce his presence, but not enough to seem careless. He emerged from the tree lean with his hands visible, playing the role of a defeated man seeking negotiation. Marco stepped onto the cabin's porch, flanked by 2 armed men. He looked haggard, his face bearing the strain of weeks on the run, but his eyes still held predatory intelligence. Russell Fraser, Marco called out. The man who thinks he controls everything. I controlled enough to destroy your life, Russell replied, stopping 50 feet from the porch. What do you want, Marco? I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything. Your house, your business, your reputation, all of it's going to burn. Already started with the house. Creative touch, by the way. Marco smiled coldly. That was just the beginning. Wait until Seattle reads tomorrow's headlines about their construction king's financial crimes. Russell's blood chilled. What financial crimes? The ones you're going to confess to before you have your tragic accident up here. Embezzlement, bid rigging, safety violations that caused worker deaths. I've been very thorough. No one will believe it. They will when Krista corroborates every detail. Amazing how cooperative she becomes when her daughter's safety depends on it. The revelation hit Russell like a physical blow. This wasn't just about revenge. Marco had orchestrated a complete character assassination that would destroy Russell's legacy and leave Hannah with nothing but shame. Where is she? Russell demanded. Safe. For now. But her continued safety depends on your cooperation. Russell calculated distances and angles, counting the visible enemies while estimating the positions of those he couldn't see. The odds were impossible, but impossible had never stopped him before. What kind of cooperation? Marco pulled out a tablet, its screen showing a prepared confession document. You're going to read this statement on camera, admitting to decades of criminal activity. Then you're going to transfer all your assets to an account I control. Finally, you're going to have a very unfortunate hiking accident. And then you and Krista live happily ever after all my money. Something like that. Russell nodded slowly, as if considering the proposal. In reality, he was activating the remote detonator hidden in his watch, a final gift from Wallace's security team. The first explosion erupted from the cabin's basement, sending two of Marco's men tumbling off the porch. The second blast came from the shed behind the building, eliminating the sniper Russell had spotted in the loft window. In the chaos that followed, Russell moved like a machine designed for killing. The first gunman died before he could raise his weapon, Russell's knife finding the gap between his ribs with surgical precision. The second managed one wild shot before Russell's pistol put him down permanently. Marco scrambled for cover behind an overturned table, screaming orders to men who could no longer hear him. Russell advanced methodically, reloading as he walked. "You made one fatal mistake, Marco," Russell called out as gunfire erupted around him. "You threatened my daughter." The final gunman emerged from the cabin's rear entrance, assault rifle chattering as he sprayed bullets across the clearing. Russell dove behind a massive tree trunk, bark exploding around him as high-velocity rounds shredded the ancient wood. But Russell had fought in urban warfare, where every doorway could hide death and every shadow might conceal an enemy. This mountain clearing was a playground compared to the streets of Fallujah. He flanked wide through the forest, circling behind the cabin while the gunman continued firing at his last known position. When Russell emerged behind the shooter, the man was reloading, confident that he had his target pinned down. The knife entered between the gunman's shoulder blades, severing his spinal cord instantly. He dropped without a sound, his assault rifle clattering across the cabin's wooden deck. "Just you and me now, Marco," Russell called out, stepping into the open. Marco emerged from behind the overturned table, his hands raised in surrender. But Russell had learned not to trust anything Marco did. The man's other hand held a dead man's switch connected to explosives somewhere in the cabin. "Krista's inside." Marco gasped, blood trickling from a head wound. "Kill me, and she dies too." Russell approached slowly, his pistol trained on Marco's center mass. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Check for yourself." "But if I release this switch, the whole cabin becomes a crater." Russell's mind raced through possibilities. Marco was desperate enough to commit suicide if it meant taking Russell with him. But the mention of Krista being inside the cabin added a new variable to the equation. "What do you want?" "A helicopter. Safe passage to Mexico. In exchange, I give you Krista, and we both walk away." Russell pretended to consider the offer while his eyes searched for any advantage. There, Marco's grip on the dead man's switch was weakening as blood loss took its toll. One precise shot to his wrist would force him to drop the detonator, but Russell needed to be close enough to grab it before it hit the ground. "Agreed," Russell said, lowering his weapon slightly. "But I want to see Krista first." Marco backed toward the cabin's front door, his eyes never leaving Russell's face. "She's tied up in the bedroom, unconscious but alive." Russell followed, every muscle coiled for the strike that would end this war once and for all. When Marco reached the doorway, Russell made his move. The shot was perfect. Marco's wrist exploded in a spray of bone and blood, sending the detonator flying through the air. Russell dove forward, catching the device before it could hit the ground and trigger the explosives. Marco collapsed screaming, his destroyed hand unable to hold him upright. Russell stood over him, the detonator safely in his grip, and smiled with predatory satisfaction. "Game over, Marco." But as Russell stepped toward the cabin to find Krista, Marco's broken laughter echoed across the clearing. "You think you've won? Check the detonator, Russell. Check the timer." Russell looked down at the device in his hands and felt his world collapse. The LED display showed 37 seconds and counting down. Marco hadn't been holding a dead man's switch. He'd been holding a delay timer that would detonate the explosives regardless of what happened to him. And somewhere inside the cabin, Krista was tied up and helpless. Russell had 37 seconds to choose between saving his enemy or letting her die. 36 seconds. 35. The countdown continued as Russell faced the most important decision of his life. Chapter 9. Ashes to Ashes. 34 seconds. Russell dropped the detonator and sprinted toward the cabin. Whatever Krista had done, whatever betrayal she'd committed, she was still Hannah's mother. His daughter would not grow up knowing her father had chosen revenge over mercy. 29 seconds. He kicked down the bedroom door and found Krista bound to a chair, duct tape over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror above the silver adhesive. She was conscious, aware, and absolutely terrified. 22 seconds. Russell sliced through the ropes with his knife, the blade moving with practiced efficiency. Krista's hands were free, then her feet, but precious seconds had vanished into the countdown toward oblivion. 15 seconds. He grabbed Krista around the waist and dove through the bedroom window as she screamed behind her gag. They hit the ground hard, rolling away from the cabin as fast as humanly possible. 8 seconds. Russell covered Krista's body with his own, pressing them both against a massive boulder that offered the only available protection. 3 seconds. 2. 1. The explosion turned night into day, a column of fire and debris erupting from where the cabin had stood moments before. The shockwave rolled over them like a physical wall, followed by burning fragments of wood and metal that rained down across the clearing. When the thunder faded and the debris stopped falling, Russell lifted his head to survey the destruction. Nothing remained of the cabin except a smoking crater and scattered embers among the trees. But Marco's laughter still echoed from near the front porch area. Russell stood slowly, helping Krista to her feet as she removed the duct tape from her mouth. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, but she was alive and conscious. "Russell," she gasped, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." Russell looked at her for a long moment, studying the face he'd loved for 15 years. The betrayal was still there. The knowledge of what she'd planned would never disappear. But she was also the mother of his child, and that created obligations that transcended personal hatred. "We'll discuss it later," he said quietly. "Right now, we need to finish this." Marco lay near the smoking ruins, his legs crushed beneath a fallen beam, his destroyed hand leaving a trail of blood in the dirt. But he was still alive, still conscious, still capable of that predatory smile that had once charmed clients and partners. "Touching rescue," Marco wheezed as Russell approached. The great Russell Fraser, choosing mercy over revenge. "Not mercy," Russell corrected, standing over his former partner. "Strategy. Hannah needs her mother alive, even if she's a treacherous bitch." Russell pulled out his phone and dialed 911, reporting a gas explosion at a remote cabin with multiple casualties. The emergency services would arrive within an hour, followed by investigators who would find evidence of Marco's crimes scattered among the debris. "You're calling for help?" Marco laughed, blood frothing from his lips. "After everything I've done?" "I'm calling to report her death," Russell replied calmly. "You were killed in the explosion while holding us hostage. Tragic end to a desperate fugitive." Marco's eyes widened as he understood. "You can't just leave me here. Watch me." Russell turned away from Marco's pleas and walked back to where Krista stood beside the smoking crater. She was staring at the destruction with hollow eyes, perhaps finally comprehending the magnitude of what her choices had unleashed. "Russell," Marco called out weakly. "We were partners once. Brothers." Russell paused without turning around. "Brothers don't betray each other, and they sure as hell don't threaten each other's children. Please, I'm dying anyway. Just make it quick." Russell considered the request for exactly 3 seconds. Then he continued walking. Behind them, Marco's voice grew weaker as blood loss and internal injuries took their toll. His pleas became whispers, then silence, as the forest reclaimed its natural quiet. Russell led Krista through the trees toward where Tamara waited with Hannah. The long hike gave them time to talk, though Russell did most of the listening as Krista confessed the full scope of her betrayal. The affair had started as revenge for Russell's workaholism. Marco had seduced her with attention and promises of a different life. But when Marco's financial situation became desperate, the relationship had twisted into something darker, a conspiracy that would have destroyed everything Russell had built. I never wanted you dead, Krista insisted as they walked. When Marco started talking about murder, I tried to back out. But he said he'd hurt Hannah if I didn't cooperate. Russell remained silent, processing her words against everything he'd learned about their plot. Some of her story rang true, but trust was a luxury he could no longer afford where his wife was concerned. They emerged from the forest to find Tamara pacing beside the truck, her relief evident as she saw them approaching. Thank God, she breathed, embracing Russell tightly. We heard the explosion. Marco's dead, Russell said simply. The threat is over. Hannah was still asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the night's events and innocent of the violence that had saved her life. Russell watched his daughter's peaceful face and made his final decision about the future. Krista, he said quietly, when we get back to Seattle, you're going to file for divorce. You'll request minimal custody, supervised visits only, and you'll take whatever settlement I offer without complaint. Russell, I know I made mistakes, but... Mistakes? Russell's voice remained calm, but his eyes were arctic. You conspire to murder me. You helped plan to orphan our daughter. The only reason you're still breathing is because Hannah needs a mother who's alive, not because you deserve forgiveness. Krista's face crumpled, but she nodded through her tears. If you ever try to take Hannah from me, if you ever put her at risk again, if you even think about betraying this family again. Russell stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. I'll finish what Marco started, and no one will ever find your body. I understand, Krista whispered. Good, because second chances are for people who deserve them. And Krista, you've used up all your chances. Russell climbed into the truck beside his sleeping daughter and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he watched the mountain clearing disappear behind trees and shadows, taking with it the last remnants of his old life. Marco Leonard would be found dead in the wreckage, his crimes exposed by evidence Russell had strategically placed among the debris. Krista would return to Seattle as a victim of kidnapping and traumatic violence, her reputation intact, but her marriage over. And Russell would rebuild his empire with the knowledge that betrayal always carried a price, that loyalty was earned through fear as much as love, and that sometimes the only way to protect what you valued was to destroy everything that threatened it. The war was over. Russell Fraser had won. But as they drove through the darkness toward Seattle, Russell understood that victory always came with costs. His house was ashes, his marriage was poison, and his trust had been shattered beyond repair. Still, he had Hannah. He had his sister's loyalty. And he had the satisfaction of knowing that his enemies had paid the ultimate price for their betrayal. In Russell Fraser's world, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.